Hello, this is how to build a long-lasting smooth ball differential with TeamSR. Make sure you have the appropriate tools for proper assembly. You have the 2mm Allen wrench, or driver shall you say. You have a X-Acto blade. You also need a pair of pliers. Make sure they're a good pair of pliers that you can use for compressing a spring, and I'll show you that later. Then you also need diff lube, which is going to be we prefer here at TeamSR, the black associated diff lube, part number 6591, and then the black grease that we would use on the thrust bearing, which is going to be part number 6588. All right, next step, make sure you have all the components to complete the diff. Now the diff's going to come with a female outdrive, a male outdrive, the thrust screw, the dirt shield, the thrust rings, thrust balls, diff balls, which we're not going to use and I'll show you in a second, the two bearings for inside the diff, the spring, the diff gear, the diff nut and holder, and the two diff rings. Now, we don't recommend using these diff balls and thrust balls. Now, what we would recommend that will last longer, be smoother, would be TeamSR TSR 078 tungsten carbide diff balls. Those are thrust balls, 6 pieces in each one. They're 5/64s, comparable to the 2.0s that come with the low-C diff. Then we also have the TSR 075 tungsten carbide balls for the diff assembly. These are 3/32 balls, and you got 14 pieces. Shortly here I'll show you how to sand the diff rings and thrust rings. Alright, TeamSR would like to recommend, before assembling the diff, to take the rings that come with the diff. You got the diff rings, you get 2 of them, and you also have the thrust rings, 2 of those as well. Well, what we do and recommend is to use 600 grit sandpaper. Grab the female end of the diff outdrive and make sure you have your diff rings and thrust rings. Grab some water. Now this is wet or dry sandpaper, a little bit on there. Take the ring. They're already pretty good, but I would like to see my reflection in this. When you can see your reflection, you know you did a good job. Put the diff ring down, slide the outdrive over the diff ring, and in circular motions you would like to spin around. You'll see the metal actually coming from the diff ring onto the sandpaper as it's getting darker. And you do this multiple times until when you pull it out of here, you'll be able to see it. If you wipe it off with a rag, how it's shinier than that, but you can do it much further than that. I don't have to show you, but do it until you can almost see your reflection in your in the diff ring. We're sanding the diff rings and thrust rings with the sandpaper of 600 grit, a little bit of water, and maybe about 2 minutes on each ring. You can clearly see this is the stock ring here on your left, and on your right is the ring that was sanded by the using the outdrive, the sandpaper, and a little bit of water. Same thing for the small rings here for the thrust balls. This would be the stock one, and this one would be the one that I would have sanded. And what I would do, instead of using this outdrive, I would just flip it over onto the sandpaper and use my thumb, lightly pushing on the sandpaper in circular motion as well. Next step, we will assemble the thrust side of the diff using associated clear diff grease and the components for this side. First thing we're going to do is use a little dab of this clear grease onto the outdrive itself where the ring will attach. We'll put it on both sides. Take the pre-sanded diff ring that I showed you previously, place it, the pre-sanded super shiny side in towards the diff balls, place it on there, and this sure won't fall off when you're building your diff. Now take the thrust screw and one of the small thrust diff rings, place it shiny side going in. Now use black associated diff grease or thrust grease, part number 6588. Swish this around as you're rotating the screw. To completely saturate the diff ring so you almost can't even see it. Set that down. Grab your TeamSR 5/64 tungsten carbide thrust balls. Put them in the palm of your hand as long as your hand's clean, so that way you don't lose them. Take that same black grease tube. We'll move this over here so you can see this. Squish a little bit out so you can grab the diff ball and place it into the assembly. Now I guess you can hold this while you're doing this, makes it easy. You can use a 2mm wrench or just place it in your hand. Go around, put the balls around using the same method. Take the other pre-sanded thrust ring, place it sanded side in towards the balls. Now compress all the black grease, as you can see what I'm doing here, in. Place the thrust screw on the wrench. Take your diff half, put it through. Now take the bearing, don't forget the bearing, place that inside the diff. You don't want to lose that out. Hold the thrust screw by the end where the threads are. Take the diff shield, the dirt shield for the thrust bearing. Exact the blade, push that in there backwards so it holds that piece in there so it won't fall out. Now you can move on to the next step. Next step for assembling the diff gear male side of the outdrives, you will need to have a pair of pliers and the spring handy. Now what we're going to do here is compress the spring with the pliers, probably about 10 to 15 times, assuring that it is broken in properly. Once that is done, you will then take the clear associated diff grease, put the 2 little dabs on the outdrive, both sides. Get your pre-sanded diff ring, place the shiny side in towards the diff balls. Now take the bearing, put the bearing over the male side of the diff outdrive. Grab your gear, snap your gear over the bearing, set that down. Grab your TeamSR TSR 075 tungsten carbide diff balls, which are 3/32 and 14 pieces. If you have a clean hand, open up your package, dump the balls inside your hand. Take that same diff grease while holding the balls, put it in each hole of the diff gear. To assure complete saturation of diff grease where the balls will go. Do this all the way around. Take the diff balls from your palm of your hand, which will be clean. Just place them all in there. There's 14 diff balls. Use that same clear tube for the diff grease. Push all the balls in the holes of the diff gear. And we move on to the next step. Step is to place the spring and the diff nut inside of the male side where the diff balls and gear are. Turn sideways, place the spring in there, then the diff nut. Push it up with your hand. Grab the opposite side where the thrust bearing side was. Put it inside of the male part of the diff and lightly tighten the screws until you feel a little bit of tension from the screw grabbing the nut on the opposite side. Feel that, make sure you rotate your diff a little bit. Next step, once both halves are assembled and you have gotten to the point where you can actually feel the tension from a little bit of tension from where you screwed the thrust bearing side into the diff nut. What you want to do is tighten a little bit, maybe quarter to half turns, and rotate your diff. Make sure it seats in properly. Tighten a little more. Keep on rotating the diff. You can use your hand or your leg. Do this 15, 20 times. Some have even used drills and put it on there, but that takes a little more time. I just kind of like to do it the simple, easy way. Repeat this process probably 6 to 7 times. A little bit, we're talking quarter to half-inch turns at once, and then repeat the rotating the diff balls inside of the diff gear, seating tighter and tighter as you tighten the diff. After repeating the tightening of the thrust screw into the diff many times while breaking it in, seating the diff balls into the rings, once you get towards the end, you'll notice, if you zoom in over here, there is the diff nut on this side, which will be close to the marking right here on your diff. Now when it's close to that, you're pretty close to where you need to be. Now they say to tighten it down, basically lock it down and then back it off a little bit. I don't really like to do that. I like to tighten it almost all the way down so you can't really tighten it too much more. Make sure it spins freely, maybe a little tight at first, but when you put it in the car, you can then adjust accordingly towards tightness that you might desire. Last step is putting your differential in the transmission case of your car. A lot of people tend to say you put it on the left side. No, you put it on the right side. I mean the left side. We've always put it on the left-hand side, left rear, that is, of when you're looking at your car, you're looking at the left rear. Right here would be the left rear tire, and this is where the screw side is for adjustment. Place it in that way, and you can feel the diff by spinning the wheels, and if it feels like a little too easy to spin, I mean, I would tighten it more, honestly, if it feels a little too easy to spin, because you're not really going to go too tight as long as you don't crank the balls down and put a flat spot on them. Just be careful, don't over crank them, do like a quarter to half turn, feel it, make sure it feels good. You do want to start with the diff being a little tight, that way when it breaks in it'll be a lot smoother, giving you a long-lasting smooth life of a ball differential diff in your TLR 2222T. Thank you, and check back again from TeamSR for more how-tos.